So, does your animation look sloppy, choppy? You aim in for that glib smoothness like a buttered baby seal? But for some reason you just can't attain it. It's just out of your reach, and you don't know why. People tend to associate smooth animation with quality animation, which is a completely false equivalence, as animation quality and animation smoothness aren't necessarily codependent. You can have good animation that isn't smooth, and smooth animation that looks like garbage, in addition to having animation that is both or neither. In the quest to pursue smooth animation, I often see other animators, especially newer ones, make decisions and mistakes that instead of smoothifying their work, make it look mechanical and choppy. Many of these mistakes are built on misconceptions that I will be breaking down for you. So this tutorial is 7 hot tips to make your animation not look like hot garbage. Do note that these tips will also apply to any animation program as well. While I'm using Toon Boom here, the process would be almost identical in Flash. Just for any rig stuff you wouldn't have to worry about pegs. But this also applies to Photoshop, Clip Studio Paint, TV Paint, even if you're just using pen and paper. These are very core essential principles. They're not program specific. I'm not even going to make this part a bullet point because it should be common sense. Plan your stuff out. Don't just immediately start posing a rig or drawing a full finished character in poses without first establishing the timings you want to use. That is how you get stuff that is mechanically stiff and hugely inconsistent. Seriously, sketch your stuff first, then draw and pose over top of that. Stop getting ahead of yourself and just be patient. By far the biggest misconception I see is that to attain smooth animation, you need to animate everything at a higher FPS or in ones. And this, quite frankly, is not true. While these elements can enhance already smooth animation, they will instead highlight faults with choppy animation. Additionally, faster frame rates and smaller frame resolutions greatly amplify the amount of work you have to do, which is an exceptional pain for frame-by-frame hand-drawn animation. It also makes it more tedious to patch up your work, which leads me to my next point. The second most common fault I see is people failing to prioritize what frames they need to actually be focusing on. Each motion should be expressed in as few keyframes as possible. Don't worry about the space you have to cover to go from pose A to B, just make sure pose A and B are strong and consistent. Captain Underpants has amazing fliporama technology that gets fluid animation with just 2 goddamn frames. You can follow the same principle. If your animation is legible without the frame, it's not a keyframe, don't draw it. Yet. Recoil, anticipation, overshoot. If there's an element in motion, especially if it's fast, it has inertia that it needs to deal with. It's going to need to prepare to accelerate, decelerate, overcompensate, and come to a rest. Not every single motion will do all 4 of these things every time, but most will have at least a few of these properties. In my humble opinion, these should be the next frames you draw after you set up your establishing keys, before you actually start doing any in-betweening. Inertia makes your motions a lot more organic, and sometimes is even important for more mechanical objects as well. Actually put emphasis on your timing. You don't need each key action to be 8 frames apart from each other. Give different poses different emphasis in the timeline depending on how important they are. At this point, you should be playing back your animation a few times to make sure that everything looks good and makes sense even though it doesn't have any in-betweens or anything. Once everything actually looks good, you're ready to actually start drawing or posing your rigs around. And now that you're starting to flesh out your animation, this is where you actually have to start worrying about easing and in-betweening. Doing straight eases from point A to point B will look stiff and mechanical and stupid. Ease in whenever something needs to accelerate or move, such as when falling or punching. Ease out when something is going to slow to a stop, such as at the top of a jump. And ease both when it's a more organic translation from point A to point B, such as repositioning or shifting in posture. This applies when tweening as well as with hand-drawn frame-by-frame stuff. With hand-drawn, you instead can attain easing and acceleration via timing charts, which can look smoother by the way because there will be more frames present, or simply by adjusting the timing on your existing frames. Distortion is especially helpful whenever you have something that's moving quickly, and it can come in a few varieties such as smearing and deformation. Smearing is basically a hand-drawn motion blur. This can help mask fast motions or even give you the illusion of a motion in exceptionally fast cases, such as when you need to go from point A to point B in just 2 frames. To keep this short, I won't tell you how to make your smears, but just make sure that their shape follows the path of the motion that you're going through. Deformation is a little bit more like squash and stretch and can work in tandem with smearing or by itself. You want to animate some grade A anime titty? Then you want to learn how deformation works. As an object accelerates, it'll stretch as if the weight is being pulled behind it. As it stops, it'll squash as if the weight is crashing into it. In both cases, the total volume or area should stay about the same, so stretching will mean that it gets longer and thinner, while squashing gets fatter and flatter. Scrub through your frames as you work. Make sure it stays consistent. Constantly play back your stuff and make sure you're not getting any wobbly phenomena where something looks like it's moving inconsistently or is shaking where it shouldn't be or is randomly pausing where it shouldn't. As you draw more frames, make sure they stay consistent, using onion skinning as a checking tool. It can also help to take things part by part instead of trying to do everything at once. If you're animating a guy throwing a punch, animate his fist first, then the body, then the arms. While not necessary, this can sometimes help with preventing wobble as you're focusing on a much smaller area at a time, making sure that it stays consistent. One other thing that I often see, and this ties into the timing bullet, people tend to want to constantly have everything in motion without realizing what this actually means. They often will do this at the expense of timing or via trying to add subtle details. I've already covered timing, so on the note of subtle details, these are things that you should do last. Do not make them part of your core animation, they are more the dressing on top. Novice animators will tend to often over-exaggerate them, which defeats the purpose of them being subtle. Or they'll try to incorporate them into keys, which is not what you should be doing. And too often I see animators and non-animators alike who think smooth means it's constantly moving, which is completely bogus. Constant motion has nothing to do with smoothness. This is something that is planned for from the start for certain animations. Only do it if your animation actually calls for it, such as like a walk cycle or something. And if you do need to do it, make sure that the movement speed is consistent and it doesn't fluctuate randomly, just like you should be doing for all your motions in animations anyway. Honestly, it's best not to worry about subtleties in animation until you're happy with the overall thing. Some examples of subtle animation might include things like a slight rise in the chest for breathing. That all said, many animations on TV will still rarely use constant subtle animations. They aren't as necessary as you think. Don't worry about them unless you actually want to deliberately do them. So to help demonstrate these points, I've had a few people send me animations that they feel need some critique. This first one is by The Loving Fool, and is a good example of timing and priority. The frames here are consistently drawn, but their timing isn't giving a sense of weight to certain motions and actions. There are also parts where it feels like there's too much of a pause between the motions and there's little reaction from the body. A simple halfway fix for this is to adjust the timings. Here I've identified what I feel to be the main keyframes and have given them a little bit more time, while the rest have been sped up a little bit. This next animation is by Bees and is a bit more polished and finalized. This is another good example to talk about timing and priority. The thing that sticks out to me is the way the arm comes out and the anticipation for the jump. These feel a little drawn out and kind of blend into one another. They feel a little slow and also remove a little bit of the impact from the jump, which by comparison comes out quick. This doesn't feel as smooth as it could because some of the motions feel extra sluggish while others feel extra fast. It's kind of hard to pick out exactly what the key frames are for this animation, but I think I've determined here what would be essential. Here is the new timing that aims to put a bit more emphasis on the jump. Here it is compared to the original. While the keys don't show the handout stretching, stuff like that can be added as a secondary motion while in-betweening. Getting your timing established with your keys first will control the overall flow of your animation. Working around these frames will allow you to slim down on your work and focus on ensuring each movement has the desired impact. Which, efficiency is highly important for an animation like this, especially considering it contains 120 frames. This last animation is by my patron Soulfire and shows how the concept of wobble can come into play, and why also looking at things in pieces helps, and also why playing a sketch also is really important. I have to record this live so that way I can scrub through these frames manually. But here's the animation. As you can see, it's a little bit rough. It's an attempt at making a dragon walk cycle. First off, there are a few parts that are actually missing to this overall. Because it's a walk cycle, it needs to go through 4 major steps. Contact, down, pass, and up. If you look at the front legs, for instance, you can see that there is no contact step. Here's outstretching, there should be a contact right here, except there's not. Then it goes down and it passes through, and then it goes up. Additionally, this is also why it helps to look at things individually. If you look at this back leg right here, just watch what happens. It's frozen here, and it's frozen there for like a full 1, 2, 3, 4, 3 frames. And then suddenly it jumps forward. So looking at this frame by frame, you can really see that this movement is very inconsistent. It's frozen here, then it skips, and then it's frozen, and then it skips. So yeah, that's why it's very important to sketch out what you're doing first. Because if you have I can tell that this animation didn't have a sketch to kind of go off of initially to kind of help it stay evenly timed and to basically be planned out. It was kind of just rigged straight from the get-go. Plan out your stuff first, especially if doing it rigged and stuff. You will thank yourself for it. There are a host of other tips and the like that I could give you or you could discover on your own when practicing, but I feel that these 7 tips are the most important and most essential. I guess technically it's 8, but whatever. In all honesty, maybe you were expecting some major secret technique to unlock the ability to make fluid animations, and maybe it's underwhelming that the secret to smoother work is just like, don't try to do everything at once, or organize your workflow, or don't get a stiffy over animating on ones. But in all honesty, these tips have a drastic impact and are often forgotten. Anyway, as usual, thank you to my Patreon supporters for supporting my work. If you want to be included in the credits of videos like these, my Patreon is linked in the description. Just do note that it is 18+ only, as I do a lot of adult content in the mix. I'm planning to hopefully start doing tutorials like these again, potentially some Toon Boom specific ones, as well as art tutorials for programs like Clip Studio Paint. But that'll all be for another time. I don't have anything more to say. Okay, bye.